A quiet ripple ran through the world of royalty that many didn't see coming. A storm had been quietly brewing within the walls of Buckingham Palace for years, and it wasn't until recently that it exploded in a flurry of media attention, royal statements, and public outcry. King Charles, the once hopeful monarch who had waited decades for his turn to lead, now stood at the center of a seismic shift. His marriage to Camilla, once a source of public scrutiny and whispers, was on the verge of collapse. But what made this scandal even more shocking wasn't just the end of their marriage. It was the bombshell announcement that King Charles had confirmed. Divorce was on the table, and it was happening. It was as if the ground beneath the monarchy had cracked wide open, threatening to swallow the centuries-old institution whole. For a family that has lived in the public eye for generations, where every whisper and every step is scrutinized, the idea of divorce between a reigning monarch and their consort was almost unthinkable. It was the stuff of tabloid headlines, the kind of drama that could have been easily brushed off as sensationalism. But now, it was a reality. The world was watching, and the monarchy's grip on tradition was beginning to slip. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But what led to this moment? What pushed King Charles, the man who once swore to honor his vows, to announce to the world that his marriage was irreparably broken? Was it the years of public criticism? Was it the immense pressure from his family, who had never fully accepted Camilla? Or was it something darker, something deeper that we've yet to uncover? The truth behind this royal divorce is far from ordinary. It's filled with power struggles, hidden secrets, and the kind of drama that could shake the monarchy to its core. In this story, we will take you through the twists and turns that led to this shocking revelation. We'll examine the hidden conflicts, the unspoken tensions, and the emotional toll this divorce has taken on both King Charles and Camilla. We'll explore the dynamics of a royal family torn apart by scandal and the public fallout that will forever change how we see the monarchy. The king, once poised to be the steady hand of Britain, now finds himself embroiled in a crisis that could threaten the very fabric of royal life. What's next for King Charles and Camilla? How will the royal family move forward in the wake of such a devastating decision? And perhaps the most important question of all, will this scandal lead to the reform of the monarchy, or will it mark the beginning of its decline? But before we dive into the details, we must ask the hard questions. What drove King Charles to make such a life-altering decision, one that would send shockwaves across the globe? And how did the woman who once seemed destined to rule beside him fall so far from grace in the eyes of the public? The answers are as complex as the monarchy itself, and we are about to reveal them all. As we peel back the layers of this royal drama, we'll examine the public's reaction, the palace's response, and the emotional fallout that has ensued. And perhaps, in the end, we'll understand why this divorce has become more than just a personal issue for the royal couple. It has become a defining moment for the monarchy as a whole. At the heart of it all, one question remains. What does the future hold for King Charles, Camilla, and the British monarchy? Will this divorce change everything, or will it simply be another chapter in a long and storied history? Stay with us as we unpack the shocking revelations, the hidden motives, and the truth behind one of the most dramatic events in royal history. The story of King Charles and Camilla's marriage is far from over, and the consequences of this divorce are only beginning to unfold. This is a tale of love, betrayal, power, and the unraveling of a monarchy. But more importantly, it is the story of how one decision, made behind closed doors, could change the course of history forever. The story of King Charles and Camilla is one of the most well-documented and yet, perhaps, the most misunderstood narratives in royal history. When their marriage was announced to the world, many saw it as a turning point, some celebrating the couple's long-awaited union, while others lamented the damage it symbolized. For decades, the public had been polarized by the notion of Charles and Camilla, torn between their long-standing love affair and the monarchy's insistence on maintaining a pristine image. But when Charles and Camilla married, after years of scandal, rumors, and strained relations, the world was forced to confront a painful reality. Their marriage marked the end of a chapter that had been written in secrecy, in tabloids, and through the lenses of paparazzi cameras. Yet, it was also a new beginning, a fresh page in a saga that had already captivated the globe for over 4 decades. At the time of their wedding in 2005, the couple had endured more than their fair share of criticism, both from the public and from within the royal family. Their relationship was built on a foundation of passion that had withstood years of scandal, but also on the knowledge that their bond was forever tainted by the ghosts of the past. From the moment they were first seen together, their love affair was viewed with skepticism and disdain. The whispers of infidelity and the fallout from Charles's previous marriage to Princess Diana followed them like a shadow, making it almost impossible for the public to fully embrace their union. And yet, despite all odds, they had made it to the altar. The wedding itself, although a deeply personal moment for Charles and Camilla, was anything but a typical royal affair. The media attention was relentless, the scrutiny unyielding. Yet, through it all, there was a sense of hope that this was the beginning of a new era, that the royal family could move forward from the controversies of the past and embrace a future of unity and stability. However, as much as their union represented a fresh start, it also symbolized a significant challenge to the royal family's long-standing traditions. Camilla was never going to be universally loved by the British public. The years of accusations surrounding her affair with Charles during his marriage to Diana were deeply ingrained in the national consciousness. Many believed that Camilla's role as the other woman was irredeemable, making her acceptance into the royal fold all the more difficult. Even with Charles's support, Camilla remained an outsider in many ways, never fully embraced by the public or the royal family. Yet, Camilla did what she could to navigate the treacherous waters of public life. In the years following their marriage, she took on her duties as the Duchess of Cornwall with quiet dignity, attending royal events and supporting Charles in his various charitable endeavors. But no matter how much she tried to ingratiate herself with the public, her position was precarious at best. It was as if the weight of history, the judgment of a nation, the scorn of Diana's supporters, was always hanging over her head. Despite the challenges, the couple persevered. They presented themselves as a united front, showing the world that their marriage was not just an act of rebellion against tradition, but a testament to their deep affection for one another. They were often seen smiling together at royal events, sharing tender moments that suggested a partnership founded not just on love, but on years of navigating the complexities of public life. Their bond seemed unbreakable, or so it appeared. However, behind the scenes, cracks began to form. The pressures of living in the royal spotlight, the constant media attention, and the weight of Camilla's controversial past began to take a toll on their relationship. The strain became evident in the months leading up to the shocking divorce announcement. For King Charles, a man who had waited his whole life to become king, his marriage to Camilla was supposed to be the final chapter in his personal journey. He had endured years of sacrifice, disappointment, and public scorn. Now, he believed, was the time for him to step into his role with dignity, to enjoy the fruits of his long-awaited reign. But what he didn't anticipate was the turmoil that would follow, not from the public, but from within his own marriage. Charles had always been a deeply emotional man, one whose feelings were often hidden behind a mask of royal duty. Yet, the emotional weight of his marriage became too much to bear. He began to retreat, becoming more isolated as the world around him grew increasingly hostile. What had once been a love story with all the trappings of royal grandeur had morphed into something darker, a story of two people struggling to maintain a marriage in the face of overwhelming public and private pressure. Meanwhile, Camilla, despite her best efforts, could not escape the shadow of Diana. Every move she made, every public appearance, seemed to be viewed through the lens of the former princess, whose tragic death continued to haunt the royal family. The media relentlessly compared Camilla to Diana, forcing her into an unfair battle for a legacy that was never truly hers to claim. The relationship between King Charles and Camilla had always been complicated, an affair that evolved into something more, but with the emotional weight of past mistakes hanging heavily over it. The more time passed, the more the cracks in their marriage deepened. The personal toll began to outweigh the public demands, and both Charles and Camilla found themselves questioning the future of their union. Though Charles and Camilla's marriage appeared solid from the outside, it had always been fraught with difficulty. The pressures of their past, combined with the unrelenting scrutiny of the public, had created a marriage that was constantly teetering on the edge. And now, that fragile foundation had shattered. As we dig deeper into this royal marriage, it becomes clear that the divorce, which now seems inevitable, was not just a decision made overnight. It had been brewing for years, silent, hidden, and ultimately unavoidable. But the question remains, how did we get here? What led to the final breaking point? And how will this decision alter the monarchy and the people involved? Behind the gilded walls of Buckingham Palace, away from the prying eyes of the public and the relentless flashes of the paparazzi, the true nature of King Charles and Camilla's marriage was far from the fairy tale it appeared to be on the outside. The truth, however, was never as straightforward as the royal family would have liked the world to believe. Beneath the polished image they projected, a growing tension simmered, one that would eventually lead to the bombshell divorce announcement that shook the entire world. In the early years of their marriage, Charles and Camilla presented a united front to the world, showcasing their shared interests, public appearances, and the occasional display of affection that suggested a harmonious partnership. But as time wore on, cracks began to appear. At first, they were small, fleeting moments of distance, a slightly colder exchange, or a hint of discomfort during public outings. But, just like any relationship, these small cracks grew larger as the years passed, and the weight of history, royal expectations, and personal struggles became increasingly difficult to manage. For Charles, the pressure was immense. He had waited decades for this moment, the moment when he could finally wear the crown. But with the throne came not just power, but responsibility, and a life lived under constant scrutiny. The monarchy was his birthright, but it was also a double-edged sword. Every decision he made, every action he took, was subject to public dissection. The expectations on him as king were astronomical. The pressure to appear dignified, composed, and in control never left him, not even for a moment. And then there was Camilla. While she had always been a strong and capable woman, she was, in many ways, an outsider. Despite her marriage to Charles and her status as the queen consort, she was never fully embraced by the British public. Her past, the affair with Charles while he was still married to Princess Diana, had left a permanent stain on her reputation. The media never let her forget it, and neither did the public. Despite her many efforts to assimilate into royal life, the shadow of Diana loomed large over her every move. No matter how much Camilla tried to build a legacy of her own, it always felt as though she was living in the shadow of someone else's story. But the tension in their marriage went beyond the media and the public perception. It was also rooted in personal grievances, unspoken resentments, and the emotional toll of living under the constant microscope of the world. For Camilla, the isolation was suffocating. She had longed for a life of normalcy, a life where she could love Charles without the world constantly judging her every move. But she was trapped in a world of duty and expectation. Even the smallest of mistakes or missteps were magnified under the public's gaze. For Charles, the pressure of his royal duties began to overshadow his relationship with Camilla. The monarch had always been a man torn between his duty to the crown and his personal desires. His marriage to Camilla had, in many ways, been a balancing act, juggling his devotion to the monarchy and his deep affection for the woman he loved. But as he ascended the throne and took on more responsibilities, the cracks in their relationship began to deepen. The emotional distance between them became palpable. There were times when Charles would retreat into his work, consumed by the demands of kingship, leaving Camilla to face the loneliness of royal life on her own. While she was expected to stand by his side, supporting him in his new role, Charles often failed to offer her the same emotional support in return. The imbalance began to take a toll on their relationship, and the emotional strain was evident in their interactions. What had once been a partnership built on years of shared history and a deep connection was now strained by the weight of expectations and unspoken frustrations. In private moments, it became clear that Charles and Camilla were both struggling with the demands of their royal life. Their once complicated but passionate love story had evolved into something much more fragile. What had once been a love story of defiance, of overcoming the odds, of fighting for their happiness, had slowly turned into a story of endurance. Camilla, once a fierce and independent woman, was now more subdued, weary from years of navigating royal life under the public's unrelenting eye. And Charles, the man who had waited his entire life for the throne, was now facing a crisis he had never anticipated. There were moments of tension when the weight of their personal struggles would come to the surface. During public events, they would exchange polite pleasantries, but the underlying tension was undeniable. The affection that once seemed so abundant now appeared strained, as though the weight of their lives together had become too much to bear. The royal couple was no longer able to hide the strain from the world, and it was clear that their bond was weakening. But it wasn't just the pressure of public life that caused the tension in their marriage. Behind closed doors, Camilla often found herself questioning her role in the royal family. She had married Charles knowing full well the complexities of their relationship, but as time passed, she began to feel more like an accessory to the monarchy than an equal partner in their shared life. The truth was, despite her official position as queen consort, Camilla was still often treated as a secondary figure, a woman who had been allowed into the royal fold but had never truly been accepted. Her role in royal life had always been carefully managed, controlled by the constraints of royal expectations and the media's scrutiny. She had learned to play the game, to present herself as the ideal consort, but the toll it took on her emotionally was immense. And, as much as Charles tried to support her, he was often consumed by the demands of his role as king, leaving Camilla to face the overwhelming pressure on her own. As the years went by, the emotional distance between Charles and Camilla grew. They no longer shared the closeness they once had. The intimacy that had marked their early years together had faded, replaced by a quiet tension that neither of them was willing to confront. The cracks in their marriage deepened, and the bond that had once seemed unbreakable was now on the verge of collapse. It was during these private moments of strain that the seeds of the divorce were sown. The emotional toll on both Charles and Camilla had reached a breaking point. Neither of them could continue to live a life dictated by royal expectations and the weight of past mistakes. Something had to give, and as the tension between them mounted, it became clear that the royal marriage that had once captivated the world was now teetering on the edge of a catastrophic fall. Every relationship has its breaking point. The moment when the accumulation of years of stress, misunderstandings, and unspoken truths suddenly becomes too much to bear. For King Charles and Camilla, that moment didn't come suddenly, but rather as a slow, inevitable unraveling that had been brewing for years. The key turning points in their marriage were not marked by dramatic public outbursts or explosive arguments, but by a quiet and subtle erosion of the bond they once shared. Behind the palace doors, where the royal couple was meant to present an image of unity, something far darker was taking root. For Charles, the weight of the crown had always been a heavy burden to carry. But as he ascended the throne, his responsibilities as king intensified in ways he had never fully anticipated. The constant pressure to make decisions that would affect the country, the Commonwealth, and the future of the monarchy was overwhelming. Charles had spent decades waiting for this moment, only to find that the reality of being king was far different from his expectations. With each passing day, the weight of the monarchy grew heavier, and with it, the strain on his personal life. He had hoped that his marriage to Camilla would provide some semblance of stability, a partner who would stand by him through it all. Instead, he found himself more isolated, more distant from the woman who had once been his closest ally. The emotional distance between them grew more pronounced as Charles became consumed by the responsibilities of his new role. His hours were longer, his days more taxing, and the demands of the crown left him little time or energy for anything else. Camilla, once a woman full of vitality and personality, found herself sidelined by the relentless nature of royal life. She was expected to stand by her husband's side, to support him in every way, but as time wore on, she began to feel as though she were losing herself in the process. Her role as queen consort was often reduced to ceremonial duties, leaving her with little opportunity to truly connect with Charles on a personal level. But the key turning points in their marriage weren't just about the pressures of public life. They were also deeply personal. As the years passed, Camilla began to question her place in the royal family. Despite her position as queen consort, she was often reminded of her controversial past. The ghost of Princess Diana loomed large over every aspect of her life, and no matter how much Camilla tried to distance herself from that chapter, it followed her wherever she went. The media's relentless comparisons between her and Diana created an emotional burden that Camilla was never able to fully escape. She was always seen as the other woman, the one who had come after Diana, and the public never fully allowed her to move beyond that role. In private, Camilla struggled with feelings of isolation and rejection. She had spent her entire life in the shadows of the royal family, never fully embraced, always seen as a figure of controversy. Despite her dedication to royal duties, her contributions were often overshadowed by her past. As much as she tried to make a difference, she never felt as though she was truly accepted. The constant comparison to Diana, the endless media coverage of her every move, and the public's judgment left her emotionally drained. For Charles, the emotional toll of his marriage to Camilla became increasingly difficult to ignore. As much as he loved her, he couldn't escape the feeling that he was caught between two worlds, his duty to the crown and his commitment to the woman he had married. In the early years of their relationship, their love had been a source of strength for both of them, a shared bond that helped them weather the storms of public scrutiny. But now, as Charles assumed the throne, that bond was tested in ways they never imagined. The pressures of being king took their toll on Charles's mental and emotional health. He was increasingly consumed by the demands of his role, leaving little room for personal connection. His isolation grew, and he began to retreat into his work, becoming more distant from Camilla in the process. What had once been a partnership built on love and shared goals had now become a strained relationship characterized by silence and emotional distance. The very things that had once brought them together, shared history, mutual support, and understanding, now seemed like distant memories. As the months passed, the cracks in their marriage deepened. The emotional distance between Charles and Camilla became more apparent. They stopped sharing the intimate moments that had once been so prevalent in their relationship. The playful exchanges, the quiet moments of understanding, the unspoken connection, they all began to fade away, replaced by silence and routine. The once vibrant and passionate love story had been reduced to something that felt more like an obligation than a partnership. During this time, the royal family watched with increasing concern. Prince William, the heir to the throne, was particularly troubled by the growing distance between his father and Camilla. While he had always supported his father's marriage, he could no longer ignore the signs that something was wrong. As Charles's emotional state deteriorated, William found himself taking on more responsibility within the royal family. He had always known that one day he would be king, but as the pressure on Charles intensified, he began to realize that the time to step up was rapidly approaching. The media, too, played a crucial role in the escalating tension between Charles and Camilla. As the couple's marriage continued to show signs of strain, the tabloids seized on every opportunity to fuel the fire. Speculation about their relationship was rampant, with rumors of infidelity, emotional distance, and even talks of separation circulating in the press. The constant scrutiny only exacerbated the situation, making it even harder for Charles and Camilla to find any semblance of privacy or peace. At the same time, Camilla found herself facing new challenges within the royal family. As queen consort, she was expected to uphold the dignity of the monarchy, but her past, marked by the affair with Charles and the controversial nature of their marriage, continued to haunt her. The royal family, always focused on maintaining a pristine image, found it increasingly difficult to reconcile Camilla's past with the expectations of the present. While Charles continued to support her, the tension between them, exacerbated by the public's judgment, became harder to ignore. As the strain between Charles and Camilla intensified, the question of their future together began to loom larger. Could their marriage survive the immense pressure of the royal spotlight, the burden of public opinion, and their own emotional struggles? The answer, as it turned out, was no. But the journey to that conclusion was a long and painful one, filled with key turning points that changed the trajectory of their relationship forever. The breaking point came when the emotional distance between Charles and Camilla became too much for either of them to ignore. The realization that their marriage was no longer sustainable hit both of them like a tidal wave, and for the first time in years, the couple had to confront the harsh reality of their situation. The decision to divorce was not made lightly, but it was inevitable. A product of years of tension, misunderstanding, and the overwhelming pressures of royal life. As the decision was made, the consequences became clear. The emotional toll on both Charles and Camilla was immense, but the ripple effect would be felt far beyond their marriage. The royal family, the British public, and the world would all feel the repercussions of this pivotal moment. But what came next was perhaps even more surprising. The fallout from the divorce would change the course of the monarchy forever. The moment King Charles announced that his marriage to Camilla was ending, the world held its breath. This wasn't just another royal scandal. It was a dramatic turning point for the monarchy, one that no one had truly anticipated. There had been whispers of trouble in the royal couple's marriage for years, but nothing had prepared the public for the gravity of this decision. The royal family, an institution built on tradition and stability, now stood at the precipice of an unprecedented moment, a divorce that would forever alter the royal landscape. It all began, as so many royal decisions do, behind closed doors. What was perhaps the most telling about this moment was the complete lack of public forewarning. Unlike other royal divorces, where public tension had been building for months or even years, this felt like a sudden rupture. It was as if the very fabric of the royal marriage had snapped in an instant. There had been no major public argument, no highly publicized affairs, no explicit signs of an imminent split. Instead, it was the quiet erosion of trust, the emotional exhaustion from living under a constant microscope, and the ever-growing weight of royal duties that led them to this fateful decision. For King Charles, this divorce was not an easy one. As the reigning monarch, he had the power to make decisions that could reshape the monarchy, but this personal decision weighed heavily on him. Camilla had been his companion, his confidant, and his love for so many years. Their relationship had withstood the public scorn, the scandal, and the harsh judgments from both the press and the public. But the harsh reality was that, as king, Charles could no longer afford to maintain the delicate balance between his personal life and his duties to the crown. The pressure on Charles to appear in control, composed, and unflappable was immense. For decades, he had watched as his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, had carried out her duties with an unwavering sense of duty, managing her own personal struggles behind closed doors. Charles, in his own right, had always been a man deeply aware of his public image. And now, as king, the stakes were even higher. The monarchy, once an institution defined by its timelessness and permanence, was now facing the very real possibility of fracture. Camilla, for her part, was left to navigate the fallout from this decision. While she had never fully been accepted by the public, she had always known her place by Charles's side. She had weathered the scandalous years of their affair, the media's never-ending scrutiny, and the cold reception from many royal family members. But what she hadn't anticipated was the emotional toll that the constant pressure would take on her marriage. Despite all her strength and resolve, Camilla had begun to feel the weight of her position, the expectations placed upon her as queen consort, the media's judgment, and the relentless spotlight on her every move. The moment Charles made the divorce official, it became clear that the royal family's carefully curated image of stability and unity was irrevocably shattered. It was as though the ground beneath them had cracked open, and the monarchy was now exposed for the world to see. For some, this was a tragic moment, a sign that even the monarchy, with all its power and grandeur, was not immune to the struggles of ordinary relationships. For others, it was a moment of relief, a sense that the royal family could finally be free of the tension and discord that had defined Charles and Camilla's relationship. The immediate fallout was swift and fierce. The British press, ever eager to cover royal matters, descended upon Buckingham Palace, eager to uncover every detail of the divorce. Headlines screamed with shock and disbelief, and the media machine went into overdrive, broadcasting every statement, every word, and every reaction from both Charles and Camilla. The palace, known for its careful control over information, now found itself unable to manage the narrative. What had once been a royal love story, filled with history and passion, was now the subject of global scrutiny. For the royal family, the implications of this divorce were profound. Charles's reign, which had begun with such promise, was now overshadowed by the collapse of his marriage. The British public, already divided over the monarchy's relevance in the modern world, was now forced to confront a painful truth. Their king, the man who was meant to embody the ideals of duty, stability, and tradition, was no longer the perfect symbol of royal unity they had hoped for. Behind the scenes, the royal family scrambled to manage the fallout. Prince William, the future king, was thrust into the spotlight even more than before. He had always been the royal family's golden child, the embodiment of hope for the future. But now, he was also the heir to a monarchy in crisis. As his father's personal life unraveled, William found himself taking on more responsibility, stepping into roles and public duties that had once been reserved for Charles alone. The strain of this new role was palpable, and it was clear that William would have to navigate not just his own future as king, but the future of the monarchy itself. The royal staff, too, was affected by the fallout. Long-standing members of the royal household were forced to adjust to the new reality, navigating the shifting allegiances and tensions that came with the divorce. The palace, once a place of regal order and decorum, now felt like a battleground, an arena where personal grievances, family loyalty, and the interests of the crown were at odds. But amid all the turmoil, one thing became clear. This divorce was not just a personal matter for Charles and Camilla. It was a crisis for the monarchy as a whole. The world was watching, and the royal family was now being tested in ways it had never been before. The monarchy, an institution that had weathered centuries of public scrutiny, was now facing a test of its very relevance in the modern age. Was the royal family still capable of weathering personal scandal and emerging unscathed, or would this divorce signal the beginning of a new chapter in the history of the monarchy, one where tradition could no longer shield it from the harsh realities of the modern world? As the dust settled from the announcement, the royal family faced a painful truth. The personal decisions of one king could have far-reaching consequences for the entire institution. And while Charles and Camilla's marriage may have come to an end, the monarchy was far from over. But what lay ahead for the royal family? Would they be able to rebuild their image and move forward, or was this divorce the beginning of the end for the once unshakable British monarchy? In the wake of King Charles's shocking divorce from Camilla, the monarchy was left to grapple with an undeniable reality. The events of the past few months had not just affected Charles and Camilla, but the entire royal family. For generations, the monarchy had been seen as an institution above personal scandals and emotional turmoil. The royal family had weathered wars, revolutions, and political upheavals, always emerging with its reputation intact. Yet now, with the announcement of a royal divorce, the very core of the institution was being questioned. What did this mean for the legacy of the British monarchy? Could it survive such a scandal? The public's reaction to the divorce was swift and divisive. On one hand, many felt sympathy for Charles, a king who had spent his entire life in the shadow of his family's expectations, only to find himself facing personal heartbreak in his moment of triumph. For some, the end of his marriage symbolized the end of the fairy tale they had once hoped for, an idealized monarchy where duty and love could coexist without the baggage of scandal. Others, however, saw the divorce as a sign of the monarchy's inherent fragility. The royal family, with its centuries-old traditions, was no longer immune to the pressures of modern life. The divorce shattered the illusion of a flawless monarchy, replacing it with a more human, and perhaps more flawed, reality. For Charles, the implications of the divorce were immediate and far-reaching. As the monarch, he was supposed to be the embodiment of stability, duty, and continuity. Yet, in the eyes of many, his marriage had been a symbol of personal failure, a painful reminder that even the most powerful people in the world are not immune to the strains of marriage and love. The public's loss of faith in the royal couple's union inevitably spread to the monarchy itself. Could Charles continue to rule with the same authority and respect if his personal life was so fractured? Was he still capable of being the unifying figure the country needed? The fallout wasn't just personal, it was institutional. The monarchy had always been a reflection of Britain's values, and now those values were being called into question. What did it say about the royal family's standing when its leader's marriage crumbled under the weight of public opinion and personal struggles? The monarchy had always presented itself as a beacon of continuity, an institution rooted in tradition and dignity. But now, it seemed as though even the royals were just as susceptible to the pressures of modern life as anyone else. Prince William, the heir apparent, found himself in the spotlight more than ever before. As his father's personal life spiraled out of control, William was thrust into a position of responsibility that he had never anticipated. As the next in line to the throne, William was expected to be the steady hand that would guide the monarchy through this crisis. But the question that lingered was whether he was ready for such a monumental task. Could he assume the mantle of leadership when his own family was in disarray? And perhaps more importantly, would the British public accept him as a king, or would they see him as the son of a monarch whose reign was already tainted by scandal? Despite his personal reservations, William was quickly forced to step up to the plate. He began taking on more royal duties, making public appearances, and slowly becoming the face of the monarchy in ways that had once been reserved for his father. But even as he fulfilled these responsibilities, the pressure on him mounted. The weight of the crown was never just about the public duties. It was about maintaining the integrity of the monarchy itself. And with the collapse of his father's marriage, that integrity was now in jeopardy. The public's perception of Prince William began to shift as well. He had always been seen as the golden child of the royal family, the future king who would lead Britain with grace and dignity. But now, as the monarchy's future was being redefined, many wondered if William was truly ready to carry the legacy of the British royal family on his shoulders. The shadow of his father's divorce hung over him, and whether he liked it or not, William was now being positioned as the answer to the royal family's current crisis. For Camilla, the aftermath of the divorce was a complicated one. While she had always been viewed with suspicion by some of the public, her role as queen consort had given her a certain level of stature and influence. Now, with the divorce finalized, she was no longer the wife of the king, but a woman without a clear place within the royal family. Her future, once secure, now seemed uncertain. What would her role be in the palace? Would she fade into the background, or would she continue to maintain her position in royal life? The answer was unclear, but one thing was certain. Camilla's future was forever tied to her marriage to Charles, and with that marriage now dissolved, her place in the royal family was more precarious than ever. The impact of the divorce extended far beyond the personal lives of Charles and Camilla. It reverberated throughout the royal family and the institution itself. The monarchy, long regarded as an enduring symbol of British values, now found itself in a period of vulnerability. The royal family was no longer invincible. It had been exposed as human, frail, and susceptible to the same emotional turmoil that afflicts any family. For many, this was a sobering realization. The monarchy was no longer just a symbol of unwavering authority. It was a family, struggling with its own internal battles. But there was another, perhaps even more profound, effect on the royal family's legacy. The monarchy, once viewed as a timeless institution, now seemed vulnerable. The public's trust in the royal family had always been fragile, and now, with the collapse of Charles and Camilla's marriage, that trust was shaken to its core. The royal family had always been seen as the embodiment of British strength and stability, but now it appeared to be anything but. The monarchy had survived scandal, revolution, and turmoil in the past, but this divorce represented a different kind of crisis. It wasn't about external forces, it was about the family itself, and that was a much harder thing to overcome. As the royal family continued to navigate the aftermath of the divorce, one question lingered. What would the monarchy look like in the future? Could it survive a personal scandal of this magnitude? Or was this the beginning of a new chapter in royal history? One where the institution would have to adapt to a world that no longer viewed it through the lens of unyielding tradition? In the coming months and years, the monarchy would have to confront these questions head-on. Prince William's leadership, the role of queen consort, and the future of the British royal family were all up in the air. The legacy of the monarchy, once thought to be invulnerable, was now in question. But one thing was certain. The royal family would never be the same again. When King Charles announced his divorce from Camilla, the news rippled through the royal corridors like a shockwave. The immediate reaction was one of disbelief, an event so monumental that it seemed to challenge the very foundation of the monarchy. The dissolution of a royal marriage was always a topic of discussion and speculation, but for it to happen under the reign of a newly crowned monarch, with the future of the British Empire hanging in the balance, felt like a seismic shift. The fallout for King Charles was immediate and personal. This was a man who had spent his entire life preparing for this moment. After decades of waiting for the throne, It was finally his time to step into the role of monarch. Yet, just when he had finally gained the crown, the emotional weight of his personal life began to threaten everything he had worked for. In the months following the divorce, King Charles found himself caught between the immense pressure of royal duty and the deep personal toll the collapse of his marriage had taken on him. For years, Charles had walked a tightrope, trying to balance his devotion to the monarchy with his love for Camilla. They had endured the harsh judgment of the public, the media's endless scrutiny, and the disapproval of certain members of the royal family. Yet, despite it all, their relationship had been one of the defining aspects of his life. And now, with the marriage falling apart, Charles was forced to confront the reality that his personal struggles were becoming public spectacles, and that was something he could no longer escape. The emotional toll on Charles was profound. As king, he was expected to maintain a composed and dignified public image at all times. But behind the palace walls, it was clear that the weight of his personal life was beginning to take its toll on him. The man who had once been poised to lead with grace and confidence now appeared weary, burdened by the relentless scrutiny of the world. The divorce wasn't just a personal loss, it was a public one, and the pressure on Charles to maintain the dignity of the monarchy while navigating his own heartache was becoming increasingly unbearable. Charles's inner circle, once a tight-knit group of advisors, began to grow concerned about his well-being. The king's emotional state had always been delicate, but now, with the added stress of the divorce and the mounting expectations of his new role, it seemed as though his mental health was being pushed to the brink. His once strong sense of duty and resolve began to waver, and there were moments when even his most loyal confidants began to wonder if he would be able to carry the burden of kingship as his personal life continued to unravel. In public, however, Charles was forced to project an image of control. As king, he could not afford to show weakness, especially not in the wake of such a personal scandal. The royal family had long been seen as a symbol of stability, and Charles understood that his ability to lead depended on the perception of unwavering authority. But the truth was that behind the scenes, the king was struggling to maintain his composure. The emotional toll of his divorce, the disintegration of his marriage, and the looming questions about the monarchy's future weighed heavily on his shoulders. The public's reaction to the divorce was a mixture of sympathy and skepticism. Many felt for Charles, who had endured a lifetime of public judgment, personal heartache, and royal duty. It was difficult for many to reconcile the image of the stoic monarch with the man who had, for so long, been perceived as emotionally fragile and vulnerable. While there was empathy for him as a man, there was also a sense of disappointment. After all, Charles had waited his entire life to become king. Now that he had finally reached that point, his personal life had exploded in a very public and very painful way. Despite the sympathy, there were also those who felt that the monarchy's credibility had been damaged. The British royal family had long prided itself on its ability to maintain an air of dignity and grace, even in the face of scandal. But now, with a divorce at the center of Charles's reign, many began to question whether the monarchy could still be viewed as the timeless institution it had once been. Could the public continue to view the royals as symbols of stability, or had they become just another family plagued by the same problems that any other family might face? For Charles, the question of his ability to lead with authority and dignity was more pressing than ever. He had always known that the monarchy required not just political savvy, but emotional strength. But now, as his personal life became a source of public scrutiny, Charles found himself facing an entirely new challenge, one that threatened his ability to maintain the trust of the public, the support of his family, and the future of the crown. The fallout from his divorce also had implications for his relationship with his son, Prince William. William had long been seen as the future of the monarchy, the one who would eventually inherit the throne from his father. But now, with Charles's personal life under such intense scrutiny, William found himself thrust into the spotlight in a way he had never anticipated. As the heir apparent, William was expected to carry the weight of the monarchy's future on his shoulders, and with his father's marriage falling apart, that future now seemed uncertain. In the early days of the divorce announcement, William stepped up to take on more responsibilities within the royal family. His public appearances became more frequent, his speeches more authoritative, and his role as the future king more evident. But even as William embraced this newfound responsibility, it was clear that he was also struggling with the emotional fallout of his father's divorce. As a son, he had always admired his father, despite the complexities of their relationship. But now, seeing his father go through such a public crisis, William was forced to come to terms with the reality that the monarchy's future was uncertain. He was no longer just the heir to the throne. He was now the face of a monarchy that was undergoing a profound transformation. For Charles, the divorce marked the beginning of a new chapter in his reign, one that would require him to reevaluate his priorities, his personal life, and his leadership. The pressure to succeed as king was greater than ever, but with the weight of personal loss, emotional turmoil, and public judgment hanging over him, it seemed as though Charles's path forward would be fraught with difficulty. He would have to decide whether he could overcome the emotional damage of the divorce and continue to lead the monarchy with the strength and dignity required of him, or whether his reign would be forever defined by the collapse of his marriage. In the days and months following the divorce announcement, it became clear that the future of the monarchy would be shaped by how Charles responded to this personal crisis. His ability to lead through adversity, to maintain his authority as king, and to navigate the fallout from his failed marriage would determine whether the royal family could survive this scandal or whether it would be forced to reckon with a future that was no longer certain. The question now was simple. Could King Charles rise above the personal devastation of his divorce, or would it be the event that forever defined his reign? Only time would tell. The end of King Charles and Camilla's marriage not only marked the collapse of one of the royal family's most controversial unions, but it also thrust Camilla herself into a position of profound uncertainty. For years, she had lived in the public's eye, constantly overshadowed by the ghost of Princess Diana. Though she had made strides in her role as queen consort, her position had always been fragile. Now, with the royal divorce officially confirmed, Camilla found herself facing a future unlike any she had anticipated. For Camilla, this wasn't just a personal loss, it was a public one. The world had watched her for decades, scrutinizing her every move, dissecting her every word. Once viewed as the other woman, the person who had torn apart Charles's marriage to Diana, Camilla had slowly rebuilt her image in the public eye. Through her charity work, her poise, and her years of dedication to the monarchy, she had earned a degree of acceptance from the public. Yet, despite these efforts, her place in the royal family always felt like it was built on shaky ground. The divorce, however, left her at a crossroads. As the queen consort, her position had been clear. She was the wife of the reigning monarch, the woman who stood beside Charles as the British royal family entered a new era. But with the marriage now dissolved, what role did she have in the future of the monarchy? The answer, for the first time in many years, was unclear. Camilla was no longer the woman who had fought for Charles's love in the face of immense public backlash. She wasn't just the lover-turned-wife. She was now a divorced woman in the eyes of the world, and with that label came both new freedom and painful uncertainty. The press had always been harsh in its coverage of her, but now, it seemed even more unforgiving. What would happen to the woman who had stood by Charles's side through scandal, media scrutiny, and a tumultuous public journey? Would she be cast aside, forgotten, or would she be given the chance to forge her own path? For Camilla, the emotional toll of the divorce was intense. Though she had lived through years of public criticism, she had always believed that her marriage to Charles would provide a sense of stability, both personally and professionally. Now, with that marriage over, she was left to navigate a new world, one that no longer had the protective shield of the royal title. The question was not just about what she would do next, but who she would be in the absence of her royal duties. In the weeks following the announcement, the public reaction to Camilla's future was mixed. Some expressed sympathy for the woman who had been maligned for so long, while others saw her as a symbol of royal failure. Her role in the royal family, which had always been contentious, now seemed even more tenuous. While some royal observers speculated that Camilla might retreat from public life altogether, others believed she would remain active, taking on more charitable endeavors and maintaining her position within the royal family's social sphere. In private, Camilla faced the emotional reality of the situation. She had spent years trying to fit into the royal family, struggling with the judgment that had followed her since her relationship with Charles first became public. The affair with Charles had tainted her reputation in the eyes of many, and even though she had worked tirelessly to change that perception, there were always whispers, always a shadow of doubt. Now, with the divorce, she was left questioning her place not just in the royal family, but in the public's eye. Would the public ever accept her, or was she destined to be the subject of scandal and judgment for the rest of her life? In the midst of this uncertainty, Camilla began to find solace in her work. She was an active patron of several charities and had always been deeply involved in efforts to improve the lives of vulnerable women and children. Even during the height of her marriage's turmoil, she had poured herself into these causes, believing that her work would be her legacy. Now, with the divorce, that work became her anchor, a way to maintain a sense of purpose and direction amid the emotional chaos that surrounded her. Her charities were a source of strength for her, and many of the people she worked with continued to support her, seeing her as a woman of integrity and dedication. She would likely continue to take on these roles, finding fulfillment in helping others, but the world was no longer viewing her as the wife of the king. The title of queen consort was no longer hers to hold. She was left to rebuild, not just her personal life, but her public life. The royal family itself was unsure of how to proceed with Camilla. While Charles had always been supportive of her, the divorce meant that her future in royal circles was uncertain. Camilla's relationship with the other members of the royal family had always been a matter of diplomacy rather than deep affection. Prince William, who had long had a complicated relationship with her, found himself at the center of royal efforts to preserve the monarchy's stability. William's position was clear. He would be the future king, and as such, his support of Camilla, though courteous, was distant. Princess Anne, too, had never been particularly close with Camilla. Their relationship had always been polite, but not warm. In fact, many members of the royal family had always been wary of Camilla, seeing her as a divisive figure who had disrupted the family's carefully controlled image. With the divorce, those tensions were only amplified. The royal family, once seen as a unified front, now appeared to be fractured in new and complex ways. The palace began to make efforts to reframe the narrative, but how could they reconcile their image as an institution of unity when one of their most senior members had just gone through a very public divorce? Despite the challenges, Camilla's future in the public eye was not entirely bleak. She had her own base of supporters, particularly among those who respected her for her work within the royal family. Some royal watchers believed that Camilla might find a way to continue serving the monarchy in a more ceremonial role, using her years of experience to guide the next generation of royals. Others speculated that she would step away from the public life altogether, choosing to live out her years in relative peace and quiet. For Camilla, the divorce presented an opportunity for reinvention. With her marriage to Charles ending, she could finally focus on herself, her legacy, and the causes that had always been close to her heart. She had always been more than just a royal consort. She was a woman with her own ambitions, values, and sense of purpose. This new chapter in her life could be a chance to finally define who she was, free from the judgments of the past. But the question remained, could she rebuild her life after the collapse of her marriage, and would the world allow her the space to do so? The coming months and years would reveal just how much of an impact the divorce would have on Camilla's life. Would she remain an influential figure within the royal family, or would she fade into the background, becoming a footnote in the history of the British monarchy? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain. Camilla's life after the divorce would never be the same. The royal family, an institution that had withstood centuries of political turmoil, wars, and personal crises, now found itself at a critical juncture. King Charles's divorce from Camilla, an event so personal yet so public, had shaken the monarchy to its core. The implications of this scandal were not just limited to Charles and Camilla's personal lives. They reached into the very heart of the royal institution. The monarchy had long been seen as an unshakable symbol of stability, continuity, and tradition. But now, with one of the most prominent royal marriages crumbling in full view of the world, questions were being raised about the monarchy's ability to adapt to modern challenges. For the first time in decades, the British monarchy was not just facing a crisis of public opinion. It was facing an existential crisis. The question on everyone's mind was, Could the monarchy survive the modern world, where transparency, personal freedom, and public accountability were increasingly at odds with the traditions of royal life? Could the British public continue to support an institution that seemed so distant from the realities of their own lives? Or was the monarchy's time in the spotlight coming to an end? For Charles, the newly crowned king, the stakes could not have been higher. His reign, which had already been marked by years of waiting, was now defined by a painful personal crisis. The questions about his marriage, his divorce, and his ability to lead would continue to hang over him as he tried to fulfill his duties as monarch. He had long been seen as a king in waiting, someone who would eventually ascend to the throne after decades of preparation. But now that he had assumed the role of king, he found himself in the middle of a scandal that threatened to undermine everything he had worked for. His personal life had become the focal point of public discourse, overshadowing his ability to lead with authority. The royal family's internal dynamics were also shifting in the wake of the divorce. Prince William, who had long been the natural heir to the throne, found himself in an even more precarious position. As the future king, his responsibility to maintain the monarchy's image and stability was greater than ever. But with his father's marriage falling apart and the monarchy's reputation now in question, William was forced to navigate a delicate balancing act. On one hand, he had to maintain his public support for his father and continue to carry out his royal duties. On the other hand, he had to begin preparing for the day when he would become king, all while facing the very real prospect that the monarchy's future was uncertain. The British public, too, found itself at a crossroads. The monarchy had long been a symbol of national identity, a source of pride for many, but how much longer could it continue to be viewed as a beacon of stability in a rapidly changing world? With Charles's divorce and the subsequent fallout, the royal family was forced to confront the growing perception that it was out of touch with the realities of modern life. The British public, known for its unwavering support of the monarchy through thick and thin, now found itself questioning whether the royal family was still relevant in the 21st century. One of the most significant challenges for the monarchy moving forward would be its ability to adapt to the changing values of British society. The days of unquestioned loyalty to the monarchy, based purely on tradition and heritage, were gone. In an age where personal accountability, transparency, and social progress were valued above all else, the monarchy found itself struggling to maintain its status as an institution that represented the ideals of modern Britain. The royal family's reluctance to change, coupled with its adherence to centuries-old customs, had left it vulnerable to criticism. And with Charles's personal life now under the microscope, the institution's ability to weather these criticisms was being tested like never before. The monarchy would have to decide whether to evolve in response to these challenges or risk fading into irrelevance. Would it continue to hold on to the values of the past, or would it take a more progressive approach, one that would allow it to reconnect with the people it represented? The future of the British monarchy depended on the decisions made by those at the very top: the king, the heir apparent, and the rest of the royal family. The question was not just about whether the monarchy could survive. It was about what kind of monarchy would emerge from this crisis. As the months passed, the royal family began to take steps toward reassessing its place in the world. Charles, though deeply affected by the divorce, continued to carry out his royal duties, determined to fulfill his responsibilities as king. But it was clear that his reign would be marked by challenges, both personal and public. The scrutiny of his every move, amplified by the divorce, would likely continue for years to come. Yet, there was also an understanding that this crisis might present an opportunity for change. As the world watched, the monarchy had the chance to redefine itself, to find a way to remain relevant in a world that was no longer enamored with its ancient traditions. The public's view of the monarchy was shifting, and the royal family was well aware of this. If they wanted to retain the public's trust and support, they would have to adapt to the times. The monarchy could no longer rely on tradition alone. It would need to find new ways to connect with the people it served. Whether through embracing modern values, engaging more directly with the public, or acknowledging the personal struggles of its members, the monarchy would need to demonstrate that it was more than just a symbol of the past. It had to prove that it could evolve with the times. Prince William, as the future king, understood this better than anyone. As he watched his father navigate the aftermath of the divorce, he knew that the responsibility of modernizing the monarchy would fall to him. The future of the royal family depended on how he would navigate the challenges of his own reign, how he would manage the monarchy's public image, how he would address the public's concerns, and how he would ensure that the monarchy remained relevant in a changing world. The royal family, for the first time in its history, was faced with a moment of reckoning. The divorce had exposed the institution's vulnerabilities, but it had also created an opportunity for growth. The monarchy had always been able to endure crises, but this one would define its future. The decisions made in the coming years would determine whether the monarchy would continue to thrive or whether it would be left behind as a relic of the past. As King Charles moved forward, navigating the personal and public challenges of his reign, the monarchy stood at a crossroads. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The royal family would have to adapt, evolve, and confront the challenges of the modern world if it hoped to maintain its place in history.